Okay, good evening. So tonight's halacha shir is entitled "Eating in Public." It's something which I've been curious about, but never had a chance to research. And it's not really connected to this week's parsha. It's something which is just a summer topic. Here in London, we are enjoying some warm weather, so the concept of eating in public is more prevalent. So what is the background? The background is a Gemara in Kiddushin. If you look at your first box, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll be near to send you the handout. Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Mem Amud Beis says, Ton Rabbonim, ha'oichel b'shuk, someone who eats in the marketplace, in the street, harizeh doimeh lekelev, he's like a dog. V'yesh oimrim posel le'edus, and some say he is posel le'edus, he is invalid to be a witness in court, in Beis Din. Now, what is the analogy to a dog? So the Marshal says on this Gemara, a kelev is always hungry. The Gemara says in Gittin, in the Bar Kamtza Gemara, in Hanizak, in the Gemara which is often learned around Tisha B'Av time, that there was one of the rich Jews of Yerushalayim was Kal B'Savua. Kal B'Savua was so wealthy that he would be very hospitable and he could have sustained with others the whole of Yerushalayim for many, many years. But why was he called Kal B'Savua? He was called Kal B'Savua because anyone who came into his house as hungry as a kelev would leave satisfied. So therefore, the kelev is always the example of an animal which is really, really hungry. So therefore, because ein mezono motzu b'bayis, says the Mashal, v'oichel gam b'shuk, and therefore he would eat also in the marketplace, im nimtze leisham, if he finds food. So therefore, someone who eats in a shuk is doimeh lekelev. Says Rashi, why is he posel le'edus? Says Rashi there in Kiddushin, the kiven she'enim min ha'yishuv. He's not behaving in a sort of a human way, in a sort of in a normal, regular fashion. Ein makbid al atzmai. He's not particular about himself. He hasn't v'le'ein no boishes upon him. He has no shame. He's eating in public. V'chein oichel b'shuk ha'il ve'ein makbid. Since he is not makbid on his own kavod, on his own dignity. And therefore he's not embarrassed to degrade himself by lying in court perhaps, and therefore he is posel le'edus. Now, what exactly is the issue? So says Taisvas, interestingly, he quotes Rashi, and Rashi says, he sort of lost his self-dignity. Eating in the street is considered a sort of a lowly form of behavior. Says Taisvas for Kasha, Amai, in the second box, Amai posel le'edus, ha'amrinim b'Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi says, Reb Shimon Rebbe have a achel b'shuka, that Reb Shimon Rebbe would eat in the shuk, and Chazir Reb Meir saw him, Amaloi ein shevach le'tamid le'echel b'shuk, mashmad le'acha ein kpeda. Says Taisvas that the problem is only if a Talmid Chacham eats in the street. For him, it's not considered dignified for a Talmid Chacham, should sort of hold himself and behave in a slightly higher, more refined level, so it's not appropriate for him. But for another person, it seems to be okay. So what we'll see, we're going to try and apply this to halacha l'maisa. What heterim perhaps are there? Is it okay to eat in the marketplace? Does it really invalidate a person as a witness? So one heter perhaps is, says the Tosfos based on the Yerushalmi, that the restriction is only for those people who are Talmidei Chachamim, but for other people perhaps ein kpeda. Now,
if someone eats in public, then what they do?
It's considered an undignified behavior. Therefore, they haven't got that sort of self-dignity. And as Rashi says, then ein a boish lezal zabatzma. He might degrade himself in other ways by being perhaps flippant when it comes to testimony and not being an accurate, not being an authentic witness. I think that's the understanding. Now, the Rabbeinu Chananel gives a different pshat. This is in the third paragraph of the Tosfos there. You know what we're talking about over here? Someone who's grabbing and eating. I.e., he's in the marketplace and he sees, imagine you go to the marketplace and there are stools and and you can nash from various stools. Say he's chapping from here and from there. So im Thomas, it says Taisvas, im Kain pshitat the apostle the Gazanhu. Of course, he's going to be an invalid aid because he's a thief. He's taking food without paying for it. V'yesh leima answers Tosfos, shechoytef b'pachas mishava pruta. He's stealing less than a shava pruta. So imagine, you're in the shuk in Yerushalayim, it's Erev Shabbos, and you're buying some nash for Shabbos, so there are some stores which sells nuts and things like that. So you take you nash a couple of nuts here and a few bits there. Each little bit is less than is a shava pruta. A shava pruta is the minimum amount, whatever that happens to be, 50p, 20p. Yeah, so you take one nut, that's less than that. So it's not very expensive. So he's taking less than a shava pruta from each store owner. Inami shegazu dava she'eni makbid olav, or he takes something where the owner is not makbid, and therefore it wouldn't constitute as theft. He doesn't become a thief, and therefore he's not pasaledus. Okay, that's Rabbeinu Chananel. Now, continues Tosfos. V'harav Eliyahu mafarish kagoin sheholach etzel hamoichrim. He's going round to the various sellers in the market. V'toyim mishel kulam, and he's nashing from all of them. Ma'at ki'ilu roitz liknos mehem, suggesting that he really wants to buy from them. V'nicha hashta shekarin kelev, and therefore he's called a dog. He's compared to a dog. Shedoim lekelev oichel kan ma'at v'kan ma'at. He has a little bit here, a little bit there. It's dog-like behavior. And the last pshat, the Rabbeinu Tam, interestingly, Pirush, the oichel b'shuk hainu she'oichel su'uda de pas. He's eating a proper meal, a bread meal. He's making a whole celebration out of this. And therefore, the gnai yoseh, says Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore that's even more inappropriate. It's a gnai, it's disgraceful for him to have a whole meal. So, two possible heterim we've seen so far. A, it could apply to a Talmud Chacham only, and B, only if he's having a sudas of pas, but not just a snack here and there. Okay, now is this brought lahalocha? So the Rambam in Hilchas Eidos Perek Yud Aleph Halacha Hey says, this is paragraph 3. V'chein habezuyin, those sort of disgraceful people, pesulin le'edos midivrehim, apostle from being an aid midrabanon, v'heim ha'anoshim sheholchim v'oichim b'shuk, people who eat in the streets in public. B'fnei kol ha'am, in front of everyone. And other people, they go undressed in the marketplace. Imagine they're doing a hard labor. So they're going in a state of semi-undress. So these people, they have no self-respect. And therefore, the Rambam categorizes the person who eats in public with that sort of behavior. And therefore, they're not makbid on Eidos Sheker. They've lost their sense of self-respect, and therefore they're questionable if they can be a kosher aid. Now, the Beis Yosef, in the next paragraph, in Choshen Mishpat Lamed Daled Lamed, so the Rambam, he brings the Rambam, at the cost of V'chein ha'bezuyim posel eidos midivreim, v'heim ha'anoshim sheholchim v'oichlin b'shuk, etc., etc. And then he brings Rabbeinu Tam. V'lo roisi b'divrei ha'Rambam hechre lekach, v'yoyse nir eloima. Says the Beis Yosef, of course, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, in his commentary on the Torah, he says, "V'yosen nirolema desfirle the hardom in posel edus, that which we say that a person is posel edus hanuk she'eichel bashuk b'fnei kol ha'am." That's if he's eating in public when there are loads of people around. She'ein by rov, avol imeichel bashuk she'ein by rov ha'am. But if you're eating in public, but there are not a lot of people around, elektsas ovrim v'shavim, there may be some people passing by. Lo mifsel v'hidur like in the Yerushalmi. So then we've got a third possibility. Third possibility is, imagine, in the long summer evenings here in London, we're here in the height of summer, Motzei Shabbos is very late. My brother-in-law Eretz Yisrael, he says in London in the summer, Motzei Shabbos goes out on Tuesday. Right? Shabbos goes out very late. So imagine you go out in the evening and you're sitting and you're having a picnic in the park. It's late at night, it's quiet, it's a cool air, and there's not many people around. It's not Oxford Circus. It's not Piccadilly. It's not the High Street. So then, according to Beis Yosef, no problem. The problem is b'fnei rov. What's the lashon? B'fnei kol ha'am, in front of a lot of people. So if it's only a few people passing by, that's not an issue. Okay, so a third heter. Now, the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, almost verbatim quotes the Rambam I mentioned above. There is an interesting Chashukei Chemet. The Chashukei Chemet we've quoted before is the great Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein. He's alive and well, one of the great poskim of our time, son of Rabbi Elyashiv, the brother-in-law of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And he has these wonderful Sfarim, the Chashukei Chemet, and on the Gemara in Brachos Nun Amud Aleph, he has the following question. What about eating in a restaurant, i.e. restaurants which have tables on the pavement? And we see this more and more. I was driving down Golders Green Road, I noticed it a couple of days ago, I guess the shir was on my mind, and I noticed that more and more stores have got tables outside on the pavement. Is that a problem? Is this caught by being, Eichel Bashuk? And what about eating on a bus? So it's one thing if you're taking a 10-minute bus ride to school or whatever it may be.
I don't know why you put them together.
I put them together because that was a question that came to the Chashuk Chemet together. So I'm just, I put them together because he did. But it's the same sort of concept. Are there, in other words, prevalent customs of eating in public would be perhaps in a sort of a restaurant with tables on the pavement, or on a bus. What about a train? What about an airplane? Is there any problem? Where is this Eichel Bashuk? What does it mean exactly? So let's take a look at this Chashuk Chemet. Very interesting. But Maseches Kiddushin Mem Amud Beis Ne'emar. He's quoting the Gemara we mentioned at the top. Ha'Eichel Bashuk harizeh doimeh lekelev. Someone who eats in public is like compared to a dog. V'yesh omrim posel edus. Amar Rav Adi ba'avin haloch yesh omrim. We paskin like that yesh omrim that it's considered posel edus. Yeshnom misados. There's a misadot. There are restaurants. Asher orchim shulchan aseihem al hamadrecha, which is a place where people pass by, a public place. Is there a problem of eating in public, in one of these tables in the street? What about eating in an autobus, in a bus, in a public bus, in public transport? Let's take a look at the tshuva. Next page. But Rambam, he quotes the Rambam. Now that's an important point. Sheholchin, the lashon of the Rambam is, what is Eichel Bashuk? Sheholchin v'eichlin, they're walking and eating in the marketplace. Ha'isif Rambam T'nai Nosef, says the Chashuk Chemet, this extra condition, Sheholchin v'eichlin Bashuk, they're walking and eating. Lefizeh ha'yosh v'eichlin yad shulchanos, ein bichlal kelev. If you're sitting down, even if it's on the pavement, and a table by the pavement, then you're not walking, you're stationary, and therefore you're not bichlal chelev. For you in Bagos Yavitz, the Yavitz in Kiddushin there says shekosov gam lahavda ben holich v'eichel b'shuk. He makes the same distinction. Leben yoshev v'eichel. Ubezem miyashiv who has kushis hateis v'sham etc. V'yitoch yishev v'kerech shelaram b'shekosov holich v'eichel b'shuk. Okay, beautiful. Now, Sibur Nosefes, an extra point lahater sachil yad hashulchan. An extra point is interesting, is the Marsha. The Marsha, his bishelochein oichel b'shuk doimeh lekelev mishum she'ein mezonah shel hakelev motzav b'bayis. The whole point of the kelev is that his food is not b'bayis, and therefore he's running around looking for food. V'lochein oichel gam b'shuk im nimtz leisham. He's just looking for food wherever he can find it. That's the dog comparison. Lefizeh ha'oichel b'misada shehotzia shulchaneseho chutza einu chaver shel kelev. But you're not randomly looking and scrounging for food here and there or eating. It's not the same analogy. And therefore, if you're going to a restaurant who happen to have tables outside on the pavement, it's not analogous to the case of the dog, which the Gemara in Kiddushin is referring to. And therefore, and he brings a medrash which says the same thing, that the Esther Rabbah, where they would make they would convert a whole sort of marketplace into a large wedding hall. And open, like the Jubilee we had here some weeks ago, where they made streets and they line the streets with tables. You make a street into sort of a festive hall. So he says that would not be the Medrash says that seems to be okay, and therefore look at the last paragraph. Perhaps you can say a Talmid Chacham. Maybe it's not appropriate for him, someone of a very dignified stature, to be eating in public and so exposed to all the people who are passing by. Okay, but otherwise, says the Chashuk Chemet, otherwise it would seem to be okay. Gam ha'achila be'otobus mistaber she'eina doimeh lekelev, and again, eating on a bus, he said, is not really dog-like behavior, mishum she'eina hoilech v'eichel, because again, he's not walking. He's stationary. Ulam, he concludes, but a Talmid Chacham should try and avoid that. Now, what about drinking? Are you allowed to walk down the street sipping a coffee or drinking a can of Coke? So it says the Shailas and Shuvas of the Siach Yitzchak. This is back in Tov Reish Sadi Dalet. So this goes back This goes back to just pre-war, 1934, I think. So he says, Nistapakti, Bahod Nifsik Rambam, and he quotes the above the Rambam in the Shulchan Aruch, Shayich B'Shuk Pasal Eidos, Im Gama Shayse B'Shuk B'Chlal Zeh. Is drinking included, is it caught by this restriction? Because the Shas, the Gemara tells us, Shtiya B'Chlal Achila. Drinking is included in eating. So he concludes after a fairly long tshuva, he says, for those who say eating a kazayis in the shuk is posel edus, l'shitas hamordechai b'perek zebeira shedafka achila b'pas ne'emazos. This is what we saw before in Tosfos. Only a full meal is a problem. V'cheinu shitas ha'Tosfos, what I mentioned earlier. B'vadai she'ein posel b'shtias mayim b'shuk, and therefore just drinking water in the public would not be a problem. You could say that drinking wine, because wine has got a status already of it's meal-like. For example, we say kiddush b'mokum suda. If you were to just drink the glass of wine, that counts as mokum suda. So you could say that wine is different, but other beverages, other drinks, cold, hot drinks, then he says lechora would be okay. Now, what about snacks? What about sweets? Chewing gum? What about, is that a problem? So I came across the tshuva of the Divrei B'Noyahu. His name is B'Noyahu Dayan. That's his name. And in a long tshuva, in a sikkum, he points about 5 or 6 conclusions. And let's go through these conclusions because it basically summarizes the key points that we've said. Number 1, this is the bottom box, paragraph 6. B'sikkum. Someone who eats regularly a proper full meal in the shuk, harize posel edus. He says that midrabanon, he is posel edus. Avalim ochel rak pam achas, then nearer the ein lepoislev. It's occasional eating. Once, he says, mistom he means occasional as opposed to being koveya. So then occasional eating in the shuk would be okay. I think people who eat generally in the street, it's not a koveya. You're not doing it on a regular basis. I sometimes see people walk down the street. I can't remember what it was. There was a period of time I used to cross this person who used to be eating sort of a sandwich on his way to work. And that maybe that is kvias. Maybe that's how he has breakfast every day. So maybe that could be a kvias. But occasional, here and there, it would seem not. Number 2, achilas arai kagenim eichel peres ein a nifsal b'kach. Snacks, for example, eating an apple or some fruit or whatever, some nash, then that doesn't puzzle you. He's not saying it's the most appropriate behavior to walk down the streets and eating. It's not perhaps the most refined way of behaving. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just being a bit sensitive to it, and maybe other people, I think my boys in school will think I'm nuts. Maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know. But I don't think it's so tsanua to be eating down, walking down the street and eating, maybe.
I was on the train, going on the train home from work today, and there was a man sitting next to me with a shawarma in pita.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's not, yeah. So I don't know if he was Jewish or not Jewish, if he's postulatus, not postulatus, but either way, of course we're talking, about Edus for Ben Yisrael, but there's something a little bit unrefined about it. There's no question. The Gemara says it's not appropriate behavior, it's undignified behavior. So the second het would be achilas arai, that just snacking is not, it doesn't puzzle you for Edus. Number 3, Talmud Chacham. Then he should refrain from eating even snacks in the shuk, in the marketplace. However, b'tzorech gadol, even a Talmud Chacham would be allowed to, etc., like the Rambam Paskins. Number 4, this is the Chashuk Chemed's case. Eating in a restaurant which has tables on the pavements, ein nifsal le'edus, because again you're not oichel v'hoylech, you're not walking in the street, you're sitting there. And lastly, ba'achila sukaria, eating a sweet nearer the ein kapeda gam Talmud Chacham, for a Talmud Chacham to suck a sweet down the street, no one really knows, I guess, and that would not be a problem. There'd be no kapeda on that. V'hamachmir gam bazeh tovel of bracha. Again, if you want to be machmir in this, tovel of bracha. So just to summarize, that was the summary. But eating in public, it's considered unrefined, undignified in the eyes of Chazal to eat in public, and therefore lechatchila one should try and avoid it. Does it actually puzzle you for Eidos? Well, we've seen lots of get-outs, as it were. One is if you're not eating a proper full meal, you're not eating bread, hot shawarma on a train, right? But you're eating just a snack, or you do it occasionally, or if it's if it's drinking, or you're eating in a table at a restaurant and you're stationary. So there are lots and lots of heterim. But is it ideal to be eating in public? Again, it seems to be unrefined, undignified behavior, which, if possible, should be avoided. Okay.